On this edition, we're going to talk about music theory and how music theory and playing the piano go hand in hand. Also, these tips that I'm going to show you on today will help you have a better understanding as to how to read music. So, let's begin. On the screen in front of you are 5 lines. These lines are called the staff, and the staff is the foundation upon which notes are drawn. On the modern staff, you have 5 lines and 4 spaces. And every note has its place on the staff. And we're going to get into what these notes sound like as in relation to the piano momentarily. So now let's talk about these 2 symbols. On the left, we have the treble clef. And this clef is used to play notes with your right hand above middle C. The symbol on the left is called the bass clef, and it's used to play notes with your left hand below middle C. So now we're going to get into how these notes are placed on each clef on the staff. Let's start with the treble clef first. The treble clef has a name, and it's called the G clef, as you see here. Now let's start placing some notes on the staff. Now, we have the notes, we have the name of the notes below, but we don't know how they sound. They just look like notes and the names of the notes. So let's go to the piano and find out how these notes sound. With your right hand placed on middle C, play middle C. Now, play D, E, F, and G, and we're going to stop right there. This note is what you're playing on the piano, and that's how the G sounds. So now let's keep going. Play A, that's what it looks like, and B, then C, D, E, F, and G, and we're going to stop right there. Now, you've probably seen on different pieces of music all these lines above the staff, and you're wondering what these lines are. Well, let me tell you. They're called ledger lines, and ledger lines are an extension of the staff. As you can see, the second line, which is the G line, is highlighted in red. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it above the 5th line. Now, as you can see, this line is not as long as the rest of the lines. That's why it's called an extension. Now let's place a note on that line. Now, where your hand is, where you stopped, play one more note, and that's A, and that's how it looks on the staff for the treble clef. Now, let's go to the bass clef. The bass clef also has a name, and it's called the F clef. So now let's place some notes on the bass clef line. Now, take your left hand with your thumb on middle C, and we're going to go down. So C, B, A, G, F, and we're going to stop right there. That's what F looks like on the staff, and that's how it sounds on the piano. So let's try to read these notes. So play F, then go up 1 to G, then go up 1 more to A, and stop. Now, the next note, it looks very similar to the note that you started with. And it is, because it's on the same line. So let's go back to F. And now let's keep going down. E, D, C, B, A, then G. And the same ledger lines that are used in the treble clef also apply to the bass clef. Now finally, we have all these lines here. So we have the treble line or the treble clef by itself. We have the bass line or the bass clef by itself. But let's see what happens when we put them together. This is called the grand staff. And the grand staff is where you have the treble and the bass lines put together. This is normally how you read music when you're playing two hands together. And this is how two clefs are joined by the middle C. And this is part one of how music and music theory applied with the piano go hand in hand. Now let's talk about note values. Each note that you see here has a value. Let's start with a whole note. The whole note has the longest note duration in modern music. Next to it is the half note. The half note receives 1/2 of the value. Now, this might look a little bit confusing, but let's treat it like a mathematical equation. As I stated, the half note receives 1/2 of the beat. So if we have two half notes, they will equal one whole note. Once again, 1/2 plus 1/2 equals one whole note. Next to it, this is called a quarter note. The quarter note receives 1/4 of the beat. Let's go back now to the equation. As I stated, 1/2 note plus 1/2 note equals a whole note. Now let's put the quarter notes into play. 1/4 note plus 1/4 note equals a half note. Same over here. 1/4 note plus 1/4 note equals 1/2 note. And as of course, two half notes equal one whole note. Now let's talk about this next note. It's called an eighth note. Reason being is because there's a flag on the note as shown in red. An eighth note receives 1/8 of the beat. Let's go back to the equation. 1/8 note plus another eighth note equals 1/4 note. Once again, 1/8 plus 1/8 equals 1/4 note. Lastly, in this set of notes is called the 16th note. And the 16th note gets 1/16 of the beat. Now, let's go back to the equation. Like I said, 1/8 note plus another eighth note equals 1/4 note. Now, let's take the 16th note. If you take 1/16 plus 1/16, you get 1/8. Same as here. 1/16 plus another 16th equals 1/8. And if you take 4/16, as shown in red, 4/16 will be the equivalent to 1/4 note. Now, there are two other notes that we're going to discuss. They are the 32nd note and the 64th note. As you can see, the 8th note has 1 flag, the 16th has 2 flags, the 32nd has 3 flags, and the 64th note has 4 flags. So basically, the more flags that are on the note, the faster the note is played. So now let's look at the overall equation. We have 2/16, 2/16. So 2/16 equals an eighth. 2/16 equals an eighth. Another set of 16th equals an eighth. And one more set of 16th equals an eighth. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 eighths. So if you combine 1/8 note plus an eighth note, you get a quarter note. Same as here. 1/8 plus 1/8 is a quarter. 2 quarters equal a half note, and a half note equals 1 whole note. It seems to be very confusing at first, but just like any other math equation, once you know how to solve the problem, then the problem becomes easier and easier every single time. Now that we have discussed about note values, now let's talk about rest. Rest represents periods of silence in a measure. Each type of rest shares a duration with a certain type of note. So let's look at the quarter note. This is the quarter note, and this is the symbol for the quarter rest. So let's put it into context. Here we have a measure in 4/4 time, 4 representing the number of beats in the measure or that are allowed in the measure, and the bottom number represents what note is going to get what beat. And in this case, the quarter note is going to get the beat. Now, if we were to play this on the piano, and we know that this note is an F, we would be at the piano and play F, 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 F. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, let's substitute the quarter note for a quarter rest. Like I said, beats represent periods of silence in a measure. So now we've substituted a quarter note for a quarter rest. So how will we play this? It would be F, F, F. If we were to count this, it would be 1, 3, 4. 1, 3, 4. Notice I did not say 2 because this symbolizes a period of rest. Even though I'm still counting in 4, I'm not going to count this beat because this is a period of rest. Now, let's talk about some other types of notes and rest that go with the note. For example, let's look at the whole note. We all know that in 4/4 time, the whole note is going to get 4 beats. This is the symbol that represents the whole rest. And as you can see, that is upside down. You see the line, and you see a little box that's upside down. That symbolizes a whole rest. Now let's take a look at the half note and its resemblance, the half rest. Now, I want you to notice that the box is now above the line. That's the whole rest. As you can see, the box is below the line, and the half rest is above the line. And it also Just like a hold rest receives 4 counts, the half rest receives 2 counts. Let's move on to the 8th rest. As you can see, here's the 8th note, and it has a flag on the note. The rest also has this little kind of curly Q thing. It almost looks like the number 7, almost. But you can see there's a little circle here, and it swoops, and it comes down. This is the symbol for an 8th rest, and it gets 1/8 of a beat of rest. And finally, in this example, we have the 16th note with its 2 flags. And also, here is the 16th rest. Now, I want you to notice there are 2 of these little curly cues. This represents 1/16 of rest. Now, I'm going to show you one more thing. As I showed you earlier in the note segment, this is the 8th, this is the 16th, and I blew this up for a reason because I want you to see that there are 3 curly cues. This is the 32nd rest. And over here is the 64th rest. So anytime you see this, it'll get 1/32 of rest, or the 64th rest will get 1/64 beat of rest. So these are the different types of rest and how they're applied in music. Now let's move along to time signatures. Time signatures play a very important role as to how we count music. Let me show you. Right here in this example, we have a treble clef with 5 lines and 4 spaces. So what I'm going to do is take a vertical line and draw it down the middle. Now we have 2 halves, 1 half here and 1 half here. Each of these halves are called a measure. So measure 1 and measure 2. Now here comes the time signatures. The top number represents how many beats can fit into this measure. So for this example, the top number is 4, which means that 4 beats can fit to complete this measure. For this example, you see we have a 3, which means that 3 beats can only fit to complete this measure. So let's go back to the first example here, 4/4 time, or as called common time. Now here comes the quarter notes that we saw in the previous video. Quarter, 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 quarter. Now, as I stated, the top number here is 4. Like I said, which means only 4 beats can complete this measure. And the bottom number represents what note is going to get the beat. And in this case, it's the quarter note. So think of it once again as a mathematical equation. 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 equals the number of beats allowed in this measure, which is 4. So if we were to count this, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's move to the second example. Now, as you can see, the top number has changed. Now there are only 3 beats that are allowed in this measure to complete it. The bottom number still stays the same. The quarter note is going to get the beat. So if we were to count this, it would be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So this is called 4/4 time or common time, and this is called 3/4 time. Now we're going to discuss one more time signature, and it's this here to the left. It's called 6/8 time. Now, as you can see, the number has changed. Now we have a 6, which means that there are only 6 beats that are allowed to complete this measure. Now, the number on the bottom has changed from 4 to 8. So what does that mean? In the other example, you saw 4, 4, which means that the quarter note was to get the beat. Now, the 8th note is going to get the beat because we see an 8. So now we have 6 8th notes, as you can see. By the 8th note getting the beat, if we were to count this in 6, because that's the top number, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, there are many other types of time signatures that are used in music, but the most common ones are 4/4, 3/4, and 6/8. And that's the description of time signatures. I want to go back and talk about key signatures a little bit further. If you remember in the series on how to play scales on the piano, I told you that every key has a key signature. And I also showed you that there are certain keys that have a certain amount of sharps, and there are keys that have a certain amount of flats. Now I want to visually show you what they look like on the staff. So let's take the key of A for an example. Now, first of all, this is the sign for a sharp. And notice how it's placed. It's placed before the note. But you would say C sharp. You would not say sharp C. You would simply say C sharp. Now, if you were writing out the scale to A, this is how it will look like. But let's take this sharp here, which is C sharp, this sharp here, which is F sharp, and this sharp here, which is G sharp. Let's take those 3 symbols and let's move them to make them a little bit more neater. Now, this is the correct way to write a key signature. Notice that the sharps have moved into this position, but they're not over here. It's understood that in the key of A, it has 3 sharps: C sharp, F sharp, and G sharp. You don't necessarily have to write G sharp, F sharp, and C sharp because the key signature defines the key. Now, let me give you another example. Let's go to the key of E. In the key of E, there are 4 sharps. This is the key signature for the key of E: F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. Let's take one more key. Let's go to D flat. In the key of D flat, there are 5 flats: B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, and G flat. This is the sign for a flat. So when you write the key of D flat out, you don't necessarily have to write out D flat, E flat with the sign, F, G flat for the sign, so on and so forth. Once it's established in the key signature right here, you can go ahead and just write out the notes. And that's the example of how to write key signatures on the staff. Now let's talk about two more things of great significance in music theory: the dot and the tie. Let's start with the dot. Now, once again, we're going to treat this like a musical equation. Here we have a quarter note followed by a dot. The dot represents that the note is going to be increased. In this case, the quarter note is going to be increased by 1/2 of a beat. Thus being said, this now turns into a dotted quarter note. Now notice the dot is after the quarter note, but you always say dotted quarter note. And this what it essentially looks like in a mathematical equation. Quarter note plus eighth note equals a dotted quarter note. Now, here's how we get that. If you can see and remember that two eighth notes put together equal one quarter note. So if you look at it once again in a mathematical equation, 1/8 plus 1/8 plus an extra 1/8 is going to equal a dotted quarter note. Or if it makes more sense to you, 1/4 note plus 1/8 note also equals a dotted quarter note. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about very quickly is the tie. And basically what the tie does, it basically ties a note. As you can see here, represented by this curved line. So let's look at it in context. Once again, we are in 4/4 time. And we have the tie here. So how will we count that? We're going to assume that this line or this curve is not here. All right. So visually imagine that it's not there for right now. We're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, remember what I said. This is measure 1 and measure 2. So once again, we're going to assume that this line is not there. So let's count both of these measures. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, let me share something with you. This line right here basically means that you're going to start over. So you would not count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The line is the separation. So it's like you're starting the count over again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's a new measure. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now let's go back to the tie. So now put the tie back into place. So what now this is going to do is this is going to hold this note over, or this count over, into the next measure. So if we were to count this, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you've noticed, like I said, the fourth beat and the first beat are connected. So once again, it's counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that is the description of the dot and the tie. On today's edition, we're going to talk about intervals and how they are constructed. So let's go to work. Let's first talk about what the definition of an interval is. An interval measures the distance between two notes. The first type of interval we're going to talk about is called a generic interval, which are measured on the staff. Let's look at the first type of interval. When two notes occupy the same line or space, they are a first or a prime apart. Now, notice we are not talking about the name of the note. The name of the note is not important. What's most important is the distance. And as you see here, they're all first or prime. Now, when you see accidentals, accidentals are ignored when measuring generic intervals. Only staff position matters. So it doesn't matter if it's C to C sharp, or D to D flat, or A sharp to A flat. It's good that you know the notes, but when we are talking about intervals, the distance is the only thing that matters. So now let's look at the second. This is the second interval. Notice from C to D, the distance is a second. From D to E, the distance is a second. From E to F, the distance is a second. And the further you go out in distance, the interval is larger. This is what a third looks like. Now, let's look at how it's written. Even though it's written this way, or if the notes are stacked on top of each other, is still a third. So from C to E is still a third, just like D to F or E to G. Notice we're only talking about the distance between two notes. Here's what a fourth interval looks like. From C to F is a fourth. From D to G is a fourth. From E to A is a fourth. And as you can see, the further we go up on the top note, the interval gets bigger. So from C to G is a fifth. From D to A is a fifth. From E to B is a fifth. Now here's what a sixth interval looks like. Notice as the notes on the top keep going up the staff, the interval gets bigger. Now this is what a sixth interval looks like. Notice the line. We're still talking about the distance between two notes. So from C to A is a sixth. And like I said, it doesn't matter how you write it, whether it's this way, diagonally, or straight up. Right here from D to B, the distance from D to B is a sixth. From E to C is a sixth. Let's go to the seventh. From C to B is a seventh. So is from D to C and from E to D. And then of course you have the octave or the eighth. Now, there's one more thing that I need to show you about intervals, and especially in these called generic intervals. I want to show you how you get to the number. So let's just take, for example, the fourth. I want to show you how you get to this number. And this applies to every other interval that I just showed you. The way you discover what the number is, or what it means, is you count from the starting note to the ending note, and that gives you the distance. So, for example, from C to F is a fourth. So you're going to count C is 1, D is 2, E is a third, and F is a fourth. So from C to F is a fourth. Let's try one more. Let's go to the sixth, and let's look at the second one. You're going to start on D. So D is 1, E is 2, F is 3, G is the fourth, A is the fifth, and here was you derive at the sixth. So from D to B is a sixth apart. Let's try one more. Let's go to the seventh. We're going to start on E. So E is the first, F is the second, G is the third, A is the fourth, B is the fifth, C is the sixth, and here you derive at D, which is the seventh. So from E to B is a seventh. And that's how you construct generic intervals. Another type of interval that we're going to discuss is called a specific interval. These types of intervals are measured both on the staff and in half steps on the keyboard. So let's look at these two types of intervals. We have from C to D and C to D flat. Now, if we were looking at these from a generic interval standpoint, and remembering the definition of generic interval is the distance between two notes on the staff. But now that we're putting in a specific interval that are not only measured on the staff, but in half steps, from C to D will be larger than C to D flat. So let's figure out why this is. There are four types of specific intervals. There are major, minor, augmented, and diminished. But I'm only going to focus on two, the majors and the minors. So let's go back to the C to D interval. Now, we're going to look at it from a specific interval standpoint. This is called a major second. Why is it called a major second? Let's go back to the definition of a specific interval. They are measured both on the staff and in half steps. So let's go to the keyboard. From C to C sharp is one half step, and from C sharp to D is another half step. So from C to D is called a major second. The next interval is a major third. It consists of four half steps. Let's go to the keyboard. From C to C sharp is 1, C sharp to D is 2, D to D sharp is 3, and from D sharp to E is 4. So from C to E is called a major third. The next interval is called a perfect fourth, and it consists of 5 half steps. Let's go to the keyboard. From C to C sharp is 1, from C sharp to D is 2, from D to D sharp is 3, from D sharp to E is 4, and from E to F is 5. So from C to F is considered a perfect fourth. The next interval is a perfect fifth, and it consists of 7 half steps. Let's go to the keyboard. From C to C sharp is 1, from C sharp to D is 2, from D to D sharp is 3, from D sharp to E is 4, from E to F is 5, from F to F sharp is 6, and from F sharp to G is 7. Thus, from C to G is considered a perfect fifth. Let's go now to the major sixth. It consists of 9 half steps. Let's go to the keyboard. From C to C sharp is 1. From C sharp to D is 2. From D to D sharp is 3. From D sharp to E is 4. From E to F is 5. From F to F sharp is 6. From F sharp to G is 7. From G to G sharp is 8. And from G sharp to A is 9. So from C to A is considered a major sixth. Let's go to the major seventh. It consists of 11 half steps. Let's go to the keyboard. From C to C sharp is 1. C sharp to D is 2. D to D sharp is 3. D sharp to E is 4. E to F is 5. F to F sharp is 6. F sharp to G is 7. G to G sharp is 8. G sharp to A is 9. A to A sharp is 10. And from A sharp to B is 11. Thus making from C to B a major second. And finally, from C to C is called the octave, and it consists of 12 half steps. And as you can see, it's basically all the half steps from C to C. Now, let's discuss the minors. Now, the way you make an interval major to minor is you're going to lower the third. For example, if you were looking at this from a major interval standpoint, from C to E is a major third. But if we make this note an E flat, like here in the example, from C to E is a minor third. And the minor third consists of 3 half steps. Let's go to the keyboard. C to D flat is 1, or C sharp. C sharp to D is 2. And D to D sharp or E flat is 3. And the reason why I said both of these names is because we're talking about the enharmonic. Now, if we're talking about a minor scale, we would call this note D flat and E flat. Once again, if we're looking at it from a minor standpoint, this note would be D flat and this note would be E flat. So let's count it again so we won't get confused. C to D flat is 1. D flat to D is 2. D to E flat is 3. Thus making this interval from C to E flat a minor third. And that's pretty much the difference between major and minor specific intervals. On today's edition, we're going to focus on chords, how to construct them, as well as how to play them. So let's go to work. Let's first start off by talking about the definition of a chord. A chord is a combination of 3 or more notes. Here is an example of a simple type of chord called a triad. A triad consists of 3 notes: the root, the third, and the fifth. So let's construct a triad, and also let's talk about how it gets its name. There are 4 types of triads: major, minor, augmented, and diminished. But for today's discussion, we're going to focus on major and minor triads. So let's first start off with the major triad. Let's take C and put it on the staff. Let's also put E and G on the staff. Now notice, this is how a triad is constructed. This type of triad is called a C major triad. So how did it get its name? First off, the C is the root. Now let's go back to the other diagram. Here is C. That's the root. So anytime you see the bottom note in a triad, that's how it will get its name. And in this case, it's C. So now let's figure the rest of it out. Let's look at the intervals from a specific standpoint. Now, from C to E, we know is a major third, because from C to E are 4 half steps away from each other. Let's also look at the relationship from C to G. We know from C to G is a perfect fifth, because C to G are 7 half steps from each other. So when you add a major third plus a perfect fifth, you get the C major triad. We also know that in the key of C, there are no sharps and there are no flats. Let's try one more type of major triad. Let's put E flat on the staff. And now let's put B and G on the staff. Now, let's try to construct an E flat major triad. Let's look at the relationship between the E flat and the G. We know that from E flat to G is a major third, because from E flat to G are 4 half steps. Now let's look at the other relationship. Now we got a problem. If you see here on the staff, we have from E flat to B, but on the keyboard, we have from E flat to B flat. Well, we know that a perfect fifth from E flat is B flat, as here on the keyboard. So now let's put it on the staff to make this an E flat major triad, because we know that E flat is the root. So what do we have to do? We have to make this B natural a B flat. And now the relationship from E flat to B flat on the staff matches the relationship from E flat to B flat on the keyboard. So now they match up, and now we have an E flat major triad. Now let's go to the minor triad. Let's put C, E, and G back on the staff. Now, if we look at this, we know that this is a C major triad, because we know from C to E is a major third, and from C to G is the perfect fifth. But we need to make this a minor triad. So how do we do that? Let's first look at the relationship from C to E. To make this a minor triad, we need to make this E flat. So we're going to lower the third note. Now, on the staff from C to E is a major third. From C to E flat is a minor third. And then looking at the relationship from C to G, that's correct. It's a perfect fifth. C to G, 7 half steps. So this is a C minor triad, because the third degree or the third note is E, but we had to make it flat. So this is a C minor triad. C, E flat, and G. Let's try one more. E flat. Let's make this an E flat minor triad. Let's look at the keyboard first. From E flat to G, we know is a major third. But we need to make it a minor third. So we're going to take this G and we're going to lower it a half step to G flat. We also need to make the B flat as well. Now we know in the key of E flat major, you have E flat, G, and B flat. So now we need to make it a minor third. So what we're going to do is put G flat and B flat. Now, if this G flat was a G natural, this would be considered an E flat major triad. But now we're making it an E flat minor triad. So now let's look at the relationship. From E to G flat is a minor third, and from E flat to B flat is the perfect fifth. So when you add a minor third plus the perfect fifth, you have an E flat minor triad. Remember that the E flat is the root of the triad. And this is how you construct major and minor triads. Now that we understand the definition of what a chord is, and we also know how to construct a chord, let's talk about two other things about the chord. They are chord voicings and chord inversions. A chord voicing is taking notes of a chord and putting them in numerous ways in order to create various sounds. We're going to use the F major triad as its example. Now let's talk about chord inversions. So we're going to be talking about chord inversions and chord voicings at the same time. This is an F major triad in root position. What root position means is the bottom note. And in this case, the bottom note is F. That's why it's called an F major triad in root position. Now we're going to take that chord and we're going to voice it in different ways. Now, I know it looks like it might not be an F major triad, but it still is. For two reasons. Number one, you're still using the notes of F, A, and C. The second reason is because the F, which is the bottom note, is still on the bottom. So it doesn't matter how you voice it, as long as you're using F, A, and C, or whatever chord you're using. But in this example, we're in F. As long as you're still using the notes of F, A, and C, and also that the F is on the bottom, as you can see here, then it's still considered an F major chord in root position. So let's listen to these examples to see how they are voiced. Let's listen one more time. So as you can hear, you hear it in different ways, but it's still an F major triad in root position. Now let's talk about first inversion. We're still dealing with the same F major triad, but now it's in first inversion. Why is that? Now the third note of the chord, which is A, is now on the bottom. So A, C, and F. is still considered an F major triad because you still have the notes of F, A, and C, but it's in first inversion because the A now is on the bottom. Going back to chord voicings, as long as you have F, A, and C, but now as you can see, the A is the bottom note. And this is why it's called an F major triad in first position. Let's listen to seeing how these sound. One more time. Finally, we have the chord in second position. We're still using F, A, and C, and it's still considered an F major triad, but now the C is on the bottom. So now we're going to spell it C, F, and A. This is the F major triad in second position. Once again, it doesn't matter how you voice the chord. As long as you're using F, A, and C, or whatever chord you're using, but in this case, we're using an F major triad. As long as F, A, and C are used, and the C is on the bottom, then this will be called an F major triad in second position. Let's listen to how this sounds. One more time. And that's chord voicings and chord inversions. Every major and minor scale has 7 special triads. These triads are called diatonic triads, which are formed from that scale's notes. So let's discover diatonic triads. We're going to focus first on major diatonic triads using the key of C as our example. This is a 3-step process. First, let's put the scale to the key of C major on the staff. Next, we're going to stack 2 generic thirds on top of each note. And now let's analyze each triad. Beginning with the C major triad. Notice the letter M and its capitalization. Anytime you see an M that is uppercased, that means that the triad or chord is in major form. So let's analyze the C major triad. From C to E is a major third, and from C to G is the perfect fifth. So adding these 2 intervals together and you get a C major triad. Let's listen. The second triad next to it is called a D minor triad. Notice the lowercase m. Anytime you see the M lowercased, that means that the chord or triad is minor. So let's analyze. From D to F is a minor third, and from D to A is a perfect fifth. So adding these 2 together and you get a D minor triad. Let's listen. Next is an E minor triad, still noticing the lowercase m. Let's analyze. From E to G is a minor third, and from E to B is the perfect fifth. Adding these two intervals together, this is called an E minor triad. Let's listen. Next to it, this is called an F major triad. Notice the uppercase M. Let's analyze. From F to A is a major third, and from F to C is the perfect fifth. Adding these two together makes this an F major triad. Let's listen. Next to it, this is a G major triad. Still noticing the uppercase M. Let's analyze. From G to B is a major third, and from G to D is the perfect fifth, making this a G major triad. Let's listen. The next triad is called an A minor triad, noticing the lowercase m. Let's analyze. From A to C is the minor third, and from A to E is the perfect fifth, making this an A minor triad. Let's listen. The next triad is called a B diminished triad. Now, I know I have not gotten into this, so let me explain briefly. The D means diminished, and it's lowercase. So anytime you see the letter D and it's lowercase, that means that it is diminished. Now, let's analyze this chord or triad. From B to D is a minor third. Now, let's look at the relationship between B and F. Now, we know that in order to construct a perfect fifth interval, it is 7 half steps. But from B to F is 6 half steps, making this interval from B to F diminish. So when you add from B to D, which is the minor third, and from B to F, which is the diminished, you get this, a diminished B triad. So let's listen to the B diminished triad. One more thing to add about this B diminished triad. From B to F is considered a diminished fifth interval. Once again, from B to F is considered a diminished fifth interval. And finally, we're back to the tonic of C. The only difference is we're in the octave from here to here. Let's listen. Now, let's discuss the uppercase and lowercase m. This is the formula for a diatonic triad in a major scale. Major, minor, minor. Major, major, minor, diminished, major. Each note has a number associated with the scale or the chord. So C would be 1, D would be 2, E would be 3, F would be 4, G 5, A 6, B 7, and C 1. So this is how you analyze the C major diatonic triad scale. Now let's talk about the minor diatonic triad. The same process that we used to uncover the major diatonic triad will be the same process that we use to uncover the minor diatonic triad. For this example, we're going to use the key of C natural minor. So first things first, let's put the scale of C natural minor on the staff. Now let's stack the generic thirds. Now let's analyze. First is C minor. Notice the lowercase m indicating that this triad is a minor triad. Let's analyze. From C to E flat is the minor third. From C to G is the perfect fifth. Adding these two intervals together gives you the C minor triad. Let's listen. The second triad is D diminished. Notice the lowercase d indicating that this triad is a diminished triad. Let's analyze. From D to F is the minor third. From D to A flat is the diminished fifth. Let's once again revisit how to get the diminished fifth. Let's go to the keyboard. If we were doing a perfect fifth from D, it would be A, which is 7 half steps. But since we're looking for a diminished fifth, we're going to take this A and we're going to lower it a half step. So from D to A flat is the diminished fifth, which is also 6 half steps. So let's go back to the triad. From D to F is the minor third. From D to A flat is the diminished fifth. Adding those two intervals together and you get the D diminished triad. Let's listen. Next up is E flat major. Notice the M now is capitalized, meaning that this triad is a major triad. Let's analyze. From E flat to G is the major third. From E flat to B flat is the perfect fifth. Adding those two intervals together and you get the E flat major triad. Let's listen. The fourth triad is the F minor triad. Notice the M now is lowercased. Let's analyze. From F to A flat is the minor third. From F to C is the perfect fifth. Adding those two intervals together and you get the F minor triad. Let's listen. The fifth triad is the G minor triad. Let's analyze. From G to B flat is the minor third. From G to D is the perfect fifth. Adding those two together from G to B flat once again is the minor third. From G to D is the perfect fifth. Now you have a G minor triad. Let's listen. Next up is the sixth triad, and it's called an A flat major triad. Notice the M is capitalized, meaning that this triad is a major triad. Let's analyze. From A flat to C is the major third. From A flat to E flat is the perfect fifth. Adding these two intervals together gives you the A flat major triad. Let's listen. The seventh triad is B flat major. Let's analyze. From B flat to D is the major third. From B flat to F is the perfect fifth. Adding these two intervals together and you get the B flat major triad. Let's listen. And finally, you have C minor, which is a replica of the first C minor, only in the octave. Let's listen. Now here is the formula for a minor diatonic scale. Minor, diminished, major, minor, minor, major, major, minor. And that's how you get the minor diatonic scale. Now let's talk about the diatonic triads for harmonic minors. To convert natural minor, which you see here, to the harmonic minor, the seventh tone is raised a half step. Therefore, each B flat is now going to be B natural. And if you notice, they're altered in the third, the fifth, and the seventh triads. So now, since these three triads have been altered, we need to reanalyze them. So let's begin. The first triad we're going to look at is this one. This is called an E flat augmented triad. Let's do some more analyzing about this triad. The A stands for augmented. Now let's look at the triad itself. From E flat to G is a major third. From E flat to B natural is the augmented fifth. So how do we get this interval from E flat to B natural? Let's go to the keyboard. If you were going for a perfect fifth from E flat, it would naturally be B flat. But since we need an augmented fifth, we're going to raise this B flat a half step. Now you also know that from E flat to B flat are 7 half steps. From E flat to B natural are 8 half steps. So let's go back to the triad. From E flat to G is the major third. From E flat to B natural is the augmented fifth, thus naming this triad an E flat augmented triad. Let's listen. Now let's look at the next altered triad. This is a G major triad. From G to B natural is a major third, and from G to D is the perfect fifth, thus naming this a G major triad. Let's listen. And finally, in the harmonic minor triad, we have B diminished. Notice the lowercase d signifying that this triad is diminished. Let's analyze. From B natural to D is a minor third, and from B natural to F is the diminished fifth, naming this triad a B diminished triad. Let's listen. And now we have the formula for the harmonic minor diatonic triad. Minor, diminished, augmented, minor, major, major, diminished, minor. Finally, let's talk about the diatonic triad for melodic minors. To convert harmonic minor, which you see here, to melodic minor, the sixth tone is raised. So every A flat you see will now turn into A naturals. Also, you notice that there are 3 triads to reanalyze: the second, the fourth, and the sixth. Let's start with the second. Now this has turned into a D minor triad. Notice the lowercase m. Let's analyze. From D to F is the minor third. From D to A natural is the perfect fifth. Adding those 2 intervals together, you get the D minor triad. Let's listen. Now on to the fourth. Now this is called an F major triad. Notice the uppercase M. Let's analyze. From F to A natural is the major third. From F to C is the perfect fifth. Adding those two intervals together and you get F major. Let's listen. Now to the sixth. This is now an A diminished triad. Notice the lowercase d. Let's analyze. From A natural to C is a minor third. From A natural to E flat is the diminished sixth. Let's go to the keyboard and let's refresh ourselves on how to make this a diminished interval. From A to E natural is a perfect fifth, but we want to make this a diminished fifth. So we're going to lower this E a half step, and now from A to E flat is a diminished fifth. So let's go back to the triad. From A natural to C is the minor third. From A natural to E flat, because we're in the key of C minor, is the diminished fifth. Adding those two intervals together and you have an A diminished triad. Let's listen. So here is the formula for a melodic minor diatonic triad. Minor, minor, augmented, major, major, diminished, diminished, minor.